Port Moresby, New Guinea, 1943. At the edge of the airfield, sitting in the tall grass, was a B-17 bomber. It didn't look like a weapon of war, it looked like trash. It was covered in moss, it was stripped of parts, it was leaking oil into the dirt. Its tail number ended in 666. To the superstitious airmen of the 43rd Bomb Group, this plane was the cursed one. Every crew that had flown it had been shot up. Every crew that had flown it had crashed or limped home with dead men on board. It was heavy, it was slow, it was a lemon. So they parked it in the boneyard and left it to rot. But one man looked at this heap of junk and saw something else. Captain J. Zemer. Zemer was a misfit. He was a rebel. He didn't fit in with the strict discipline of the Army Air Forces. He couldn't find a crew that wanted to fly with him. So he decided to build his own crew, and he decided to build his own plane. He walked into the boneyard. He pulled old 666 out of the mud. He didn't just fix it, he turned it into a monster. He scrounged machine guns from wrecked fighters. He added armor plating from scrap metal. A standard B-17 had 13 guns. Zemer put 19 machine guns on old 666. He mounted a fixed .5 caliber machine gun in the nose that he could fire like a fighter pilot. He turned the heaviest, slowest bomber in the fleet into a flying porcupine. He gathered a crew of fellow misfits, men who had been rejected by other pilots, the eager beavers. They weren't fighting for the Army, they were fighting for each other. And they were about to volunteer for a mission that headquarters called impossible. A solo mapping run over the most heavily defended island in the Pacific. They were gonna fly one plane against an entire empire, and the empire was waiting.
The target was Bougainville. This wasn't just an island, it was a fortress. The Japanese had built immense airfields there. It was swarming with Zero fighters. It was the linchpin of the Solomon Islands. The Marines were planning an invasion, but they had a problem. The maps were wrong. The charts were from the 1800s. They didn't show the coral reefs. They didn't show the depths. If the Marines landed blindly, the landing craft would get stuck on the reefs. They would be slaughtered in the surf. Headquarters needed photos, high-resolution, low-altitude photos of the coastline. But you can't send a squadron of bombers to do that. They're too big, they're too slow. You have to send one plane, alone. It has to fly straight and level. It has to act like a sitting duck. When the mission came down, nobody raised their hand. It was a suicide pact, except for Jay Zemer. He looked at his bombardier, Joe Sarnosky. Sarnosky was already a hero. He had enough points to go home. He had his ticket out of the war. He could have been sitting on a beach in California. But Sarnosky looked at Zemer and said, "If you're going, I'm going." The rest of the crew nodded. They loaded the cameras, they loaded the ammo, they climbed into the cursed plane. As the engines coughed to life, spitting black smoke, the ground crew watched them go. They didn't expect to see tail number 666 ever again.
The flight to Bougainville was quiet. The Pacific Ocean stretched out like a blue sheet of glass. The sun climbed higher. The heat inside the unpressurized fuselage began to rise. They reached the island. It was beautiful. Green jungle, white sand. But hidden in that green were the airfields of Buka and Buin. Zemer dropped the plane down. They weren't hiding, they were taking pictures. For 20 minutes, they flew straight and level. The cameras clicked. They were mapping the reefs that would save thousands of marine lives. But down on the ground, the Japanese were watching. They saw the lone bomber. They scrambled the fighters. And they didn't just send a patrol, they sent the wolves. 17 Mitsubishi A6M0s rose from the jungle. These weren't rookie pilots. They were from the 251st Kokutai. These were veterans. Leading them was Chief Petty Officer Yoshio Oiki, a legitimate ace. On the flight deck of old 666, Zemer saw them, small specks against the clouds. Then the specks turned into silhouettes. Then the sun glinted off their canopies. Zemer clicked the intercom. Fighters, 12 o'clock. Most pilots would dive. They would run for the clouds. But Zemer needed the photos. He still had a few miles of coastline left to map.
He didn't turn. He kept the plane steady. The Zeros formed up. They knew how to kill a B-17. You don't attack from the back. The tail guns are too strong. You attack from the front. The head-on pass. You fly straight at the bomber's nose at 300 miles per hour, firing your 20mm cannons, and you peel off at the last second. The B-17's nose is glass. It has no armor. It is the weak spot. Chief Oiki lined up his sights on the glass nose of old 666. He was looking right at Joe Sarnosky. The collision speed was over 500 miles per hour. Ziemer fired his fixed nose gun. Sarnosky fired his flexible nose gun. The Zero fired its cannons. The air between them filled with lead. Boom! A 20mm explosive shell smashed through the plexiglass nose of the bomber. It didn't just break the glass, it exploded inside the cockpit. The effect was devastating. The nose of the plane became a shrapnel blender. The shell exploded directly in front of Joe Sarnosky. Sarnosky was lifted off his feet. He was thrown backward into the catwalk beneath the cockpit. His body was riddled with shrapnel. A jagged chunk of steel tore open his side. He was bleeding catastrophically. He was, for all medical purposes, a dead man. But the shell didn't stop there. The shrapnel tore through the instrument panel. It shredded the flight controls. It tore into Captain Ziemer. Ziemer's left leg was crushed. His right leg was shredded. His arms were lacerated. The cockpit was awash in blood. The wind was screaming through the shattered nose, whipping maps and debris around the pilots. The plane lurched. The oxygen system was destroyed. The hydraulic system was cut. In the nose, Sarnosky lay in the debris. He was coughing up blood. The pain was absolute. He looked up. Through the hole in the glass, he saw another Zero coming in for the kill. It was lining up for a second pass to finish them off. Sarnosky didn't crawl to the escape hatch. He didn't call for a medic. He dragged himself, inch by agonizing inch, back to his gun. He pulled his broken body up. He grabbed the handles of the .5 caliber. He didn't have the strength to stand, so he draped his body over the gun. He waited. The Zero got closer. Sarnosky squeezed the trigger. A stream of tracers poured out of the shattered nose. The Zero flew right into the wall of bullets. It disintegrated. Sarnosky collapsed back onto the floor. He had cleared the way.
The battle had lasted 30 seconds. It would continue for 45 minutes. Old 666 was now a flying wreck. The rudder pedals were slick with Ziemer's blood. His legs were useless. He couldn't feel them. But the control cables for the ailerons were cut. The only way to turn the plane was to bank it using the elevators and the rudder. Ziemer had to fly the plane using only his broken legs. Every time he kicked the rudder pedal, bone ground against bone. The pain was blinding, but he refused to pass out. He was playing a 3D chess game with 16 remaining Zeros. The Japanese pilots were relentless. They swarmed the bomber like angry wasps. They attacked from the top. They attacked from the bottom. They shot out the radio. They shot out the intercom. But Ziemer had turned old 666 into a porcupine for a reason. The 19 guns roared back. The top turret gunner, Tech Sergeant Pudgy Pugh, was firing so fast his gun barrels started to glow red. The waist gunners were slipping on spent shell casings. The tail gunner was screaming targets. They shot down a second Zero, then a third, then a fourth. The Japanese couldn't understand it. They had put hundreds of rounds into this plane. It was full of holes. The pilot should be dead. The engines should be burning. But the zombie plane wouldn't fall. In the cockpit, Ziemer was fading. The loss of blood was shutting his brain down. His vision was tunneling. He would fly for 2 minutes, maneuver the plane to give his gunners a shot, and then pass out. The co-pilot would grab the yoke, shake Ziemer awake, and Ziemer would snap back to consciousness, check the instruments, and keep fighting. Pass out, wake up, fight, pass out, wake up, fight. Down in the nose, Joe Sarnosky was quiet. He was still slumped over his gun. He had refused medical aid. He told the others to keep fighting. Sometime during the chaos, amidst the roar of the engines and the screaming wind, the bombardier breathed his last. He died at his post.
Finally, the impossible happened. The Japanese ran out of ammo.
They had thrown everything they had at the American bomber. They had riddled it with cannon fire. They had killed the bombardier. They had crippled the pilot. But the B-17 was still flying. Frustrated, low on fuel, the remaining Zeros tipped their wings and turned back to Bougainville. The sky went silent. But the danger wasn't over. They were 600 miles from home. They had no hydraulics, no flaps, no brakes. The instruments were smashed, and the pilot was dying. The flight home was a haze of agony. Zemer refused to leave the cockpit. He knew that if he let go of the controls, he might never wake up. He kept his feet on the blood-soaked rudder pedals. He kept the nose up. They crossed the mountains of New Guinea. The airfield at Dabadura came into view. This was the final test. Landing a B-17 requires finesse. It requires flaps to slow down. It requires brakes to stop. Zemer had neither. He was coming in hot. He lined up the runway. He cut the power. Old 666 slammed onto the dirt. Without brakes, it careened down the strip. It ground-looped, spinning violently, dust flying everywhere, until it finally shuddered to a halt. The ambulance crews were already running. They had seen the plane coming in. They saw the jagged hole in the nose. They saw the shredded metal. They pulled Zemer out of the cockpit. He looked like a corpse. He had lost half his blood volume. They pulled Sarnosky out of the nose. He was gone. The ground crew started counting the damage. They counted 1 hole, 10 holes, 50 holes. They stopped counting at 187 bullet and cannon holes. The plane was structurally destroyed. It should have broken apart in midair.
Captain J. Zemer didn't die that day. Doctors fought for 3 days to save his life. They saved his legs, but he would never walk the same again. But he had the film. The intelligence officers developed the photos from the cameras. They were perfect. They showed the reefs. They showed the depths. They showed the gun positions. Months later, when the Marines stormed the beaches of Bougainville, they didn't get stuck on the reefs. They knew exactly where to go. Thousands of men survived the landing because of the photos taken by Old 666. Jay Zemer and Joe Sarnosky were both awarded the Medal of Honor. It was the only time in World War II that 2 members of the same crew received the nation's highest honor for the same mission. The rest of the crew received the Distinguished Service Cross. It remains the most highly decorated flight in American history. Old 666 never flew again. It was dragged back to the boneyard. It had done its job. It had been a piece of trash, a cursed lemon. But for 1 hour over the Pacific, it was the toughest ship in the sky. We often think of heroes as super soldiers, men who are invincible. But the crew of Old 666 were misfits. They were the guys nobody else wanted to fly with. They flew a plane that was destined for the scrap heap. Their story teaches us something visceral about the war in the Pacific. It wasn't won by superior technology. The Zero was a better plane than the B-17 that day. It was won by grit. It was won by a bombardier who crawled back to his gun while holding his own insides together. It was won by a pilot who flew a 30-ton bomber with broken legs. They didn't fight for the flag. They didn't fight for the map. They fought because they had made a promise to each other. If you go, I go.
If you want to know more about the B-17 Flying Fortress and why it was able to take this kind of punishment, check out our deep dive video on the engineering of the Flying Fort right here. And a question for you. Zemer volunteered for a suicide mission. In today's world of drone warfare and satellites, do you think we will ever see courage like this again? Let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and keep your eyes on the skies.